Our first guest tonight is Raymond Teague. He is a retired Air Force member and actually worked on several Apollo projects. He's going to tell us the project in his own words. Here he is right now in studio. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Teague.
You're welcome.
All right. Now, you were talking today on the Alex Jones radio show about your history, and I'll do you a disservice if I try to quote all of it myself. So can you tell our viewers out there who may not have caught the segment what your history is with NASA?
In reality, I don't want to make the NASA mad at me. I was never a member of NASA.
Okay.
I was badged. I was an Air Force officer assigned to the program, working in the Air Force, working on the NASA project or on Apollo project, but I was not a government employee.
Okay.
And a fine detail. And then after that, I worked in an intelligence, Air Force intelligence shop, and then after that, after Vietnam, I got laid off from the Air Force, and I went to work for Lockheed, two different Lockheed companies, and after all that ran out, I worked for some solid-state manufacturers in Austin.
Mm-hmm.
That has its own set of tall tales and problems.
Okay. Rumors and so forth.
One of the things you don't recognize or people aren't aware of is in solid state, if you're building integrated circuits, you're etching silicon. Well, silicon is a glass and it's pretty impervious to everything. So using fluorine and nitric and sulfuric acids and various combinations of solutions, you have a very dangerous toxic situation. And the vats that these are transferred one another in clean rooms, and the room has to be ultra clean because even the tiniest speck of dust on an integrated circuit ruins the whole circuit. I mean, it may not ruin the whole wafer, but what you may have either a few large or hundreds of tiny circuits on a disk.
Right.
Any contamination at all ruins it. Ruins that particular
device. Now, sir, if we get back to the Apollo, the actual mission,
okay,
unless you had
let me tell you what the rest of this is. So you can wind up driving past these semiconductor houses, and you are likely to see a whole parking lot full of people that are dressed in clean room clothes with their boots and the whole gown, acid-resistant gowns on. And the reason what has happened is the air conditioning. They have huge blowers on these rooms to keep the acid fumes blown out of it. And if you get caught in there very long, where you'll wind up a dead person.
Right.
So as soon as the alarms go off, you throw everything down, you don't take your clothes off or anything, you run. And they have a reassembly area in the parking lots where everybody goes so they can keep track and make sure everybody got out. And I've had that happen a number of times.
Now, do they have any kind of decontamination if something like that happens? Do they have any process to help people?
No, the only thing you do, get out in the open air, then you can take your clean room clothes off. And when going back in, those are now dirty. So you throw those in the re-clean hamper and put on new booties, suit, coveralls, hood, everything you need, mask, to go back in the clean room. And yeah, there is a decontamination. Then you go through a decontamination, air blow off to, and
yeah.
This goes along with the space program in that you're operating in an artificial atmosphere under controlled conditions, and if something goes wrong, your life is in immediate danger if you don't do the right things.
Oh, yeah.
All right, getting back to what we were talking about on Apollo 13. When on Apollo 13, I happened to be at the end of my normal shift, and when something happened, we didn't know what it was until much later, and but it was very serious. All electric power was lost, or not all. Only a few circuit breakers remained closed on the Apollo command capsule for Apollo 13, and the rest of it, these circuit breakers powered the telemetry systems that allowed the ground controllers to see what the status was of all the different systems. And this included life support systems of all type, for instance, that control the amount of CO2 that was allowed in the air and the oxygen pressure. And they didn't dare just throw them back on because we might have had an uncontrolled fire, and in those conditions, a little bit of that would have been the end of them.
Yeah, not to mention they don't have a large area to separate in.
That's right. So, and also we had, during Apollo, for all these missions, there were books of emergency procedures, just like if you are familiar with an aircraft, if you're flying an aircraft, you have emergency procedures. And if something goes wrong, you turn to the procedure you've got on your knee, flip through a book that tells you the steps you're to take to recover.
Right.
Well, that on Apollo, this was endless, and at the same time, this event was totally unplanned, of course, and they didn't know what to do about gaining it back. Well, I happened to, the group I was with, the guidance and control system, our breakers did not blow, or we would have been done for. But so they had the navigation system up, and this gave us time to sit and listen and observe and analyze and pray,
right,
trying to figure out what was wrong, while everybody else was pulling their hair out trying to figure out what their systems was doing with no data.
Now, what was your first thought when this happened? You know, what was your first hunch, or what was the group's hunch that something had gone wrong? What did you guys think it was?
Well, we didn't know, but it was serious. This was just after a telecast that had been done in the lunar module, and the lunar module and the command module were coupled together by two rings that fitted together and held the craft together, and they were just large enough to move from one capsule to the other.
Okay. From
the lunar module to the command module, which was the transport between the Earth and the Moon. And they just were closing. They hadn't closed it out. They hadn't put the stops back in yet, which is one of the things that saved us, or saved the crew and the mission, or saved the crew. Anyway, since our system was working, we had time to pay attention to what everybody else was doing. And when they started resetting breakers a few at a time, or they got down to, they found out that they had almost no oxygen left in these tanks and had no power. Well, we powered things back up. They got the telemetry back, discovered that there was very little time left to do anything, electric power left to keep the system going. And this was called a non-free return. They were in a trajectory that would have intersected the Moon had they remained going the way they were going.
Instead of going around the Moon.
Instead of going around the Moon. So we had to do a very quick burn, or use the rocket. We wound up using the rockets on the lunar module because they didn't dare know what would happen if we tried to fire the command module, service module motor. But in order to do this, we had to get the two aligned. Well, normally we would have taken 3 readings between these rings and averaged them out and got the lunar module coupled to the command module, and so that the data that was in the gyroscopic or nav system that was on the command module would match that on the lunar module. And that was absolutely necessary. When you were separated going to lunar, you normally would have done that going into orbit around the Moon. But we had to do it right then. And even then, in order to keep the system going, they had to switch to the re-entry batteries. Well, if you ran the re-entry batteries all the way down, you wouldn't be able to re-enter because you wouldn't be able to control the jets to keep the heat shield forward going into the atmosphere. And so we accomplished that. They did a quick they did the burn. Then everything was shut down. Everything was powered down that could be powered down, including almost all the fans and so forth. It was then that we found out that, well, the only way to keep the CO2 levels at a level that could be used, I mean, that the astronauts could survive in,
right,
was to use the oxygen absorbing canisters that were in the lunar module. And in order to do that, they had to rig up a cardboard assembly, and it would duct tape to blow the...
Duct tape?
Yeah, they had duct tape on board. They had, because what the systems people did, they had, buildings where all this was tested and had been built, and they spent all night coming up with things that could be done with what they had on board.
Right.
To put this together.
Now, I'll interrupt your story briefly. Now, how probable was this scenario before the launch? When you guys were prepping and trying to get ready for possible scenarios that could go wrong, was this one of the top ones, or where did it fall? Every
simulation that was done was to solve problems, systems problems. But nothing like this was ever simulated because it was not envisioned. This was something that was not survivable.
Something they never thought would happen, or you wouldn't even survive it if it did.
No. And what had happened was there was a thermostat in the liquid oxygen tank. The liquid oxygen was boiled off as a vapor. In order to get it to boil, provide enough vapor to run the fuel cells, you had to heat it up, which was done with what amounted to something that looked like a water tank, electric water tank heater. Okay. And they had a thermostat on that. And they had a stirrer also. But anyhow, the point stuck on this and caused the pressure to rise in the tank to where it failed. The tank exploded, and just by overpressure. And when that did, why, it blew one of the quarter panels off, a whole quarter section off of the command module. That this was the light support system, and propulsion systems were all built in this rocket that was underneath, that the command module sat on top. Mm. And so we didn't know how much damage had been done, what had been damaged. So we didn't dare light that one up.
Right.
And as far as what had happened, the crew looked out and they could see all this stuff, insulation and parts and bits of material floating around outside the windows. So they knew something very adverse had happened, but nobody knew exactly what until they figured out that the oxygen tank had blown up.
So you're trying to figure this out on the ground. They're trying to figure it out, in the atmosphere.
Normally, everything on almost everything imaginable on the command module was telemetred to the ground, so that you had a readout on almost everything. But when you lost electric power, then all this visibility went away to where we were blind, didn't know what had happened.
Right. Now, I'm not sure if it was in reference to this, but on the Alex Jones radio show, you were talking about that you were at some point fed some false information. Is that correct?
No. A different subject. Anyhow, to get past Apollo 13, the burn was successful. The trajectory was changed to a fly around the moon and back. We did have to make another burn on the way back because the corridor of safety to hit the Earth's atmosphere was only about 20 miles deep. And when you're 250,000 miles away, 20 miles is a very small hole at the end of that you had to be in. So that was another I won't go into it, but anyhow, it was figured out by some of the people I work with how to do it with what they had on board, how to get it, the guidance package on the lunar module aligned to where they could successfully make this maneuver, and it was done.
Right.
Okay. Now, what I was talking about, for this to all been faked, or it could have been done, But you would have had, you talk about some science fiction writers that would to come up with all the problems that actually went on, would have been virtually zero impossible. And as I said, I worked with a Russian engineer much later, years later, and he assured me that it was faked, that we did not go to the moon.
This is what somebody told you, a Russian engineer told you it was fake.
Right. And my experience later in life on other things indicated to me that it was at least possible. I believe we went to the moon. I believe that everything happened through Apollo 17 that was supposed to. But then there were other things happen. For instance, or many other things, I won't go into all of it, but they canceled they destroyed the tooling and the drawings to make the Saturn V heavy lift rocket. And now the Russians are flying stuff for us because we don't have anything that will do it. And the shuttle could not replace that. You don't have the heavy lift capability with the shuttle to put up large payloads. It just wasn't built big enough to do it. And this was highly suspicious to me, and I said, why in the world would you destroy our capability of flying heavy payloads into space? Now, back when all this science fiction started, back when I was in middle school, high school, I saw one program was called Destination Moon, where a rocket was built. And they went up and they built a space station and then flew to the moon from there. But the space station was built in the form of a wheel that spun around, and you lived on the outside and walked on the outside. That was the floor to give you artificial gravity.
Okay.
Well, this is still a big problem, and why it wasn't done with the fuel tanks we threw away on every one of them on Apollo. I mean, not on the shuttle. That enormous fuel tank, a few more feet per second, would keep it in orbit, and you could actually build a large space station out of that. We talked about it, suggested it, and so forth. It wasn't done. But to have built a sensible space station that a man could stay on for a long time, you would need gravity. They would need some sort of artificial means of having a simulation of gravity.
Yeah, otherwise their bodies will deteriorate.
Otherwise, their muscle tone, their blood circulation, everything is affected. In fact, if you've been in space a long time and you land back on the ground, you're kind of like a jellyfish. They have to fish you out of the
They got to go there and pull you out of there.
Pull you out and get you back on in a wheelchair and until you can get back up to where you can keep yourself going. Because when you have no artificial gravity after, especially if you're up for months, then you're so weak you can't do anything.
Exactly. Now, I want to go back to a point that you made earlier. You were talking about how you were talking to the Russian engineer, and they said that, this thing is faked. And you said, you're at least open to the possibility. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
The Russians I worked with later on, years later, told me that we really didn't go to the moon. And, I gave them the reasons why I thought we did, but they still weren't convinced. Something else that surprised me, that they told me that, well, in the plant I worked in, there was a lunchroom with a microwave oven. And so you're not allowed to have that in Russia. We don't have microwave ovens. They're illegal.
In Russia?
In Russia.
Oh, okay. I didn't know
Well,
that.
I was surprised to learn that. And later on, they were accepted. I think they now have microwave ovens. But the deal with a microwave oven is that the food you cook in them is very bad for you. For instance, if you take water and boil it in a microwave oven, and even though you aerate it later to cool it off and get it back to ambient temperature, if you put fish in it, for instance, they will die. They cannot live in a microwave oven. Well, if the fish can't live in the water you've microwaved, what happens to your food when you ingest it? This cannot be good.
Yeah, and not to mention all the preservatives and other things in the food.
Well, what I do personally is I do use a microwave oven, but I never cook anything in a microwave oven. If I have to run it for more than a minute or so to get a batch heat it up. I put it in an ordinary dish on a conventional electric stove. I don't do it in a microwave oven.
Right.
They're great for warming things up where you can do it in 30 seconds or so, and that way you don't convert chemically all the liquid and everything in it to something else that you're not supposed to be eating.
Right. But back to the launch, was there any information that you've thought was damning one way or the other, that convinced you one way or the other, it makes you think that the launch did happen or did not happen?
No, I personally witnessed one of the launches.
Oh, yeah, or one of the space missions. That'd probably be more accurate.
But, after you launch and you see it go out of sight, you don't know what happens after that. Well, but we have all these other things go on. One of the things that is on the plus side that we really went to, anything you could, as an engineer on the program, anything you could do during the mission to help if you weren't doing something else, why you would get assigned to do something. And one of them was on Apollo 12. On Apollo 11, size monitors and a corner reflector array was set on that if you shined the light on it, you would get it shined back, just like on these reflectors on the cars, or actually little diamonds inside the lenses. If you shine a light on it, no matter how the light is coming from, it's reflected back to the source.
Right.
Well, these several packages like that were left on the moon on Apollo 11. Well, Apollo 12, the top stage, what was called the S-4B, the final rocket that was used for part of the propulsion to get to the moon, you had to take the command module off, turn it around, and attach it to the lunar module and extract that out of the top of the S-4B. But that was left as junk. Well, it was decided instead of sending it to the sun someplace, they would crash it into the moon and see what the vibration, what type of vibration was put in.
Okay.
Well, this was done with strip chart recorders. They were a long piece of gear with needles like you see on these earthquake instruments that give you the level of an earthquake. And I had to be taught hastily how to load the paper and change paper and ink and so forth on the strip chart recorders. So I became the operator of the strip chart recorders. This was only an hour out of Apollo 12.
Well, Mr. Teague, we're just about out of time. Is there any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
Anyway, the strip chart recorders, after this, I forgot how much the S-4B weighed, but it hit, I think, at approximately 5,000 miles an hour into the surface of the moon. The moon rang like a bell for the next 30 minutes. The needle swept from one side of the chart to the other, and this went on, and it finally tapered off, but it went on for 30 minutes. That the reflection from the surface went from one to, would be reflected off the backside of the moon and back, and that was unexpected that we would see anything like that.
Right.
And I actually operated that system, so I know it was there and it existed. But
you don't know about everything else, but you can at least personally attest for that.
There are a number of things that I can attest to that, yes, it looks like we did go to the moon.
Put a man on the moon.
Yes. And, but why that, like I said, probably the surface photography with the Hasselblad cameras was fake because the radiation more than likely fogged the film to the point where it was virtually worthless by the time we got it back on the surface, back to the labs on the surface.
Okay, that's a very good point. Very good point. All right, well, Mr. Teague, I'm sorry we're out of time and we have to move on to the rest of the show, but I definitely appreciate you for sitting in with us and also being on the Alex Jones Radio Show.
You're quite welcome.
All right, thank you, sir.
Because there's a war on for your mind. That has been our motto here at InfoWars for my 18 years of battle against the globalist. And now we see the open announcements of global, private, corporate tyranny over our governments. That's what the New World Order is an unaccountable private combine of organized crime engaged in corporate takeovers of nation states and the conscious attempt to abolish basic rights and fundamental liberties. Infowars.com is not just leading the charge against this here in the U.S. or North America. We are leading the charge worldwide. And that's because our listeners, our viewers, our supporters, fellow freedom lovers like you across the planet resonate with our message of liberty and telling it like it is. And that's why for the last 2 years especially, I have thrown everything I've got, my time, my energy, our backup capital, everything into really trying to awaken the sleeping giant that is humanity. And that's why the July issue that just came in a few days ago is so important. We've already sold about half the stock we have of it at cost in groups of 10 up to 100 in bulk. It covers the entire NSA spy grid, how it ties in worldwide, how it's not about stopping terrorists, but about suppressing and dominating and controlling the free press and political opposition. And in this magazine, we don't just have 3 free bumper stickers like I did a few months ago. We have 10 bumper stickers, 4 full-size ones with amazing messages guaranteed to get people thinking like America has been occupied by globalist forces. Infowars.com. Listen to Alex Jones at Infowars.com. Infowars.com. Forbidden information. Listen to Alex Jones. Infowars.com. And then on top of it, 6 medium-sized bumper stickers with the message as well. These are key to post in legal and lawful areas on your book bag, your computer, your car, or to give friends and family. I have printed 500,000 of these bumper stickers. Only half of this month's run of magazines has them. So when you purchase them in bulk or you're a 12-month subscriber, you will get the special issue. And I can't afford to do this every month, so it's going to be quite a while until we do this again. Please take advantage of this. Buy them in bulk and give them to your friends and family and encourage them to get these bumper stickers out, because with 500,000 stickers, we can reach tens of millions of people with the message of truth. They want to collectivize us. They want to bankrupt us. They want to drive us into their arms to control us. They want to dumb us down. But the sleeping giant that is free humanity is awakening. So I want to thank you all for your support. I want to encourage everybody to go to InfoWarsStore.com and to get a 12-month subscription or to give a gift subscription. Imagine 12 of these coming to your friends or family's door to wake them up. Or to give a gift subscription to the local police department or your local congressman or woman. This is how we're going to affect change, voting with our dollars and voting with our time. Again, visit InfoWarsStore.com today to subscribe, to get the magazine in bulk, or to give a gift subscription, or to give yourself a subscription to wake up friends and family. I am all in. I am committed 110% to not mince words and to not back off and to boldly confront the globalist. And our listeners and supporters, our info warriors who aren't behind us, they're right beside us. So I want to thank all of you that have supported us in the past, and I want to encourage all of you out there who may be on the fence, that know this information is true, but have been scared to take action. You had better be scared of not taking action and letting this monstrous system come to fruition. Now is the time to commit. Now is the time to say which side of history you're on. Now is the time to stand against the globalist and the New World Order. And regardless of whether you get this July issue, this July 4th Resistance to Tyrants issue, spread the word about liberty, resist corruption in your area. Millions of us doing little things can move mountains together. I'm Alex Jones signing off for Infowars.com and the Infowars team.